The man in the window. It was an old house on the edge of town, hidden beneath a canopy of dead trees. The sort of house that whispered to you in the dark, even when you weren't listening. People in the town spoke of it in hushed tones, warning travelers not to pass too close. Most of them had forgotten what had happened there long ago, but the house still remembered. It had stood vacant for years, the windows filled with a suffocating darkness. But one winter night, a foreigner, a man named Adrian, moved in. He was a writer, seeking solitude to finish his novel. His eyes were sharp, his demeanor distant, like someone who had come from a faraway place, both physically and emotionally. Adrian had heard the rumors of the house, but he didn't believe in ghosts or curses. He laughed it off and settled in, eager to embrace the quiet life. He found comfort in the shadows that danced on the walls as the wind whistled through the cracked windows. However, after a few days, something started to feel off. It began with the window. It was the largest window in the house, positioned at the front, facing the street. Each night, Adrian would sit near it, staring at the dark street outside. He had become somewhat obsessed with it, drawn to the blackness beyond. But there was always something unsettling about it, a presence. It wasn't just the usual loneliness of an empty street at night, there was something more, something watching. On the fifth night, as Adrian sat by the window, the moonlight reflecting off the glass, he saw a figure. A man, standing in the far corner of the street, staring directly at him. His features were obscured by the shadows, but Adrian could feel the weight of his gaze. At first, Adrian thought it was just his imagination. Maybe the isolation was starting to get to him. But when he blinked, the man hadn't moved. He was still there, standing perfectly still, eyes locked on the window. Adrian's heart raced. He thought of closing the curtains, but something stopped him. He needed to know who this person was. Why were they staring at him? The man stood there for what felt like hours, unmoving. And then, just before the clock struck midnight, Adrian saw the figure begin to move. Slowly, with an eerie grace, he took a step forward, then another, until he was standing right beneath the window. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. He could see the man's face now, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. The man's lips parted, and Adrian could hear him whispering something. The words were barely audible, but Adrian's pulse quickened as he strained to listen. It sounded like, "Come closer." Terrified, Adrian stepped back from the window, his mind racing. No one could have gotten that close without him noticing. There was no one else on this street. Who was he? He moved to the back of the house, checking every door and window. Locked. Everything was secure. But as he walked back into the living room, the floor creaked beneath him. Turning slowly, he saw a shadow dart across the room. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He rushed to the front door, but when he looked through the peephole, the street was empty. The man was gone. But the next night, he was there again. And the night after that. And every night since. Adrian had tried everything. He covered the window with heavy curtains, but in the dead of night, he would hear the soft scratching sound against the glass, like nails dragging across it. The whispers grew louder, clearer. "Come closer. Come closer. I'm waiting." Sleep-deprived and paranoid, Adrian's obsession with the window only deepened. He began to suspect that the man was more than just a stranger. He was something ancient, something tied to the house, watching him, waiting for something. But for what? One evening, when Adrian couldn't take it any longer, he opened the window. The night air was cold, biting at his skin as he leaned out, looking down at the street. There was no sign of the man. But that's when he heard it, a soft, grating voice, coming from the street. "You're not supposed to be here." Adrian whipped around, but no one was there. His heart raced in his chest as he tried to shake the feeling of being surrounded. The days passed in a blur, each one more unsettling than the last. The whispers continued, the shadow growing ever closer. And then, on the final night, as he sat by the window, the man appeared once more. This time, Adrian did not blink. He did not look away. He could feel the man's presence like an icy hand on his spine. Slowly, the man began to move toward the house, his footsteps soundless against the frozen earth. Adrian's breath caught in his throat as the man reached the window and pressed his face against the glass. But this time, Adrian did not feel fear. There was something more, something darker. He stepped forward, his hand reaching for the window, drawn to the man's gaze. As his fingers brushed the cold glass, a smile stretched across the man's face, a wide, unsettling grin that seemed to tear his features apart. The whisper came again, but this time, it was not a request. It was a command. Come, closer, come inside. With one last, frantic breath, Adrian opened the window fully. The moment the man stepped inside, the house seemed to groan, as if it was waking from a long slumber. And then, silence. No more whispers. No more shadows. The house, once again, was empty. But every night since, when the moon is full and the winds are still, someone can be seen standing in the window, watching the street outside. Waiting for the next foreign soul to wander too close. The end. The vanishing roommate. In a quiet university town, nestled among the cobbled streets and ivy-clad buildings, there was a mysterious dormitory on the edge of the campus. It was an old building, known as Greystone Hall, and it had a reputation for being haunted. The strange thing was, no one really talked about the hauntings except in whispers, late at night, when the moon was hidden behind clouds. Selina, a foreign exchange student from Greece, had just arrived at the university. She was eager to begin her studies, but upon entering Greystone Hall, she felt an odd unease. The building was ancient, with creaking floors and dimly lit hallways, but it was the only available dormitory. She had no choice but to settle in. She was assigned to a small room on the third floor, a place that was as charming as it was unsettling. Her roommate, a reserved girl named Sophia, was from Spain. Sophia was friendly, but she rarely spoke about herself. She seemed lost in her own thoughts, staring at nothing in particular when Selina would ask her questions. But it was Sophia's mannerisms that caught Selina's attention, how she would look at the door as if expecting someone, or how she'd jump at the slightest sound, as though it were a part of something bigger than her. The two girls lived in an unspoken truce, with Selina often burying her nose in her books, and Sophia seeming to slip further into her strange, quiet world. It was only on the rare occasion when they were both awake late at night that they spoke, though the conversations were odd, always veering into strange topics. One evening, after an intense study session, Selina came back to their room, feeling exhausted. But when she opened the door, Sophia was gone. Her bed was perfectly made, her desk undisturbed, and there was no sign of her anywhere. Confused and a little anxious, Selina assumed she had gone out, but when morning came, Sophia still hadn't returned. Days passed, and Selina grew more and more worried. Her calls to Sophia's cell phone went unanswered. She visited the dormitory's front desk, but the staff claimed they had not seen her. No one remembered Sophia ever being there. The more Selina asked around, the more the answers became cryptic. People told her, in hushed tones, that Sophia had been there once, long ago. Selina's growing concern turned to fear when, late one night, she saw something strange. As she sat in her room, studying, she heard soft footsteps from the hallway. The door creaked open, and Sophia appeared in the doorway. But there was something wrong with her. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and hollow, and she moved with a stiff, unnatural gait. "Sophia?" Selina asked, her voice trembling. "Where have you been?" Sophia didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at Selina, her eyes glassy and vacant. And then, she whispered, in a voice that was not quite her own, "You need to leave, Selina. Before it's too late. Before the room claims you too." The door slammed shut. Selina's heart raced. She ran out into the hallway, but when she turned the corner, Sophia was gone. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Desperate to understand, Selina began to research Greystone Hall. What she found sent a chill down her spine. According to old records, there had been several students who disappeared over the years, all living in the same dormitory. None of them had ever been found, and none of them had ever left any trace. The room they were assigned to, the very room she now occupied, was known for one thing: it was cursed. Students who stayed there for too long would eventually disappear, consumed by the building itself. That night, as Selina lay in bed, the air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around her. She heard whispers, soft, murmuring voices, coming from the walls themselves. Her body was frozen with fear as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The voices called her name, coaxing her to join them in the depths of the building. She tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if the room itself had locked her in. In a panic, Selina grabbed her things and rushed to the window, but when she looked out, the ground below was gone. Instead, she saw a vast, empty void, as if the entire building had shifted, its foundation sinking into nothingness. Suddenly, there was a soft tap on the window. She turned, and there, standing in the dark, was Sophia, her face twisted in an unnatural grin. "Join me," Sophia whispered, her voice hollow and cold. "The room is waiting for you." Selina screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the void. Her body felt heavy, as if the very air was pressing her into the floor. And then, everything went black. The next morning, a cleaning crew found the room empty. Selina's belongings were gone, but there was no sign of her. Just an empty bed, perfectly made, and a faint whisper of a name on the wind, Selina. The staff at Greystone Hall would later claim that nothing had changed. Another student had disappeared, and the cycle would continue. As for Sophia, no one ever saw her again, and no one remembered her name. But those who lived in Greystone Hall spoke in hushed tones of the room on the third floor. They said that sometimes, late at night, if you listened closely enough, you could hear the soft whispers of the vanished, calling out to anyone who would listen, trying to warn them of the curse that claimed them. And always, the name Sophia could be heard just above the rest. Trapped in the forest, a horror story. It was a stormy evening when the group of 5 friends Lena, Max, Theo, Samira, and Ivana decided to take a trip to a remote forest, far from civilization. It was the kind of place whispered about in the nearby villages but never visited. Legends told of strange happenings, eerie whispers in the wind, and bizarre figures seen only in the corner of one's eye. But for the group of adventurous souls, these tales only fueled their curiosity. Max, always the leader, insisted they spend the night in the forest. "Imagine how beautiful it will be when the fog rolls in," he said. "Just us, the trees, and the mystery. No distractions, no phones. We can finally disconnect." The friends, eager for a break from their mundane lives, agreed to go. They packed camping gear, brought snacks, and set off in high spirits, unaware of the ominous signs that waited for them in the shadows. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the trees grew taller and closer together, blocking out the little light that had remained. The air grew colder and heavier. It felt as if the forest itself was alive, watching them, its every creak and whisper echoing in their minds. By the time night fell, they were deep in the woods, far away from the safety of the path they had come in on. They set up camp beside an ancient, twisted oak tree, its bark blackened by time, its gnarled branches reaching out like claws. They started a fire, laughing and telling stories, but as the flames flickered, an unsettling silence settled over the camp. The wind died down, and the usual sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, were replaced with an unnatural stillness. Samira, a keen observer, was the first to notice something odd. In the distance, hidden behind the trees, she saw shadows moving. Not the way animals move, but in a deliberate, calculated manner, as if something or someone was walking just out of sight, following them. She pointed it out to the others, but when they looked, there was nothing. "You're imagining things," Ivana laughed nervously, but even she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The night stretched on, the fire crackling weakly. It was then that Lena, the most practical of them, heard something that made her blood run cold, a soft, barely audible whisper, coming from somewhere near the trees. She froze, straining her ears. The whisper grew louder, more distinct, but still unintelligible. "Did anyone else hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Theo, always the skeptic, laughed it off. "Probably just the wind or some animals." But then the whispers turned to growls, low and guttural, like something lurking just beyond their vision. The fire flickered, casting long, terrifying shadows on the ground. They all stood up, tense, eyes darting around. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the trees, tall, slender, with long arms and pale skin that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Its face was obscured by a hood, but its eyes were hollow, endless pits of darkness. The creature stood motionless, staring at them. No one dared to breathe. Max was the first to act, grabbing a nearby branch and stepping forward, but before he could reach it, the creature's voice echoed in their minds, chilling and foreign. "You have trespassed. You will not leave." The words filled their heads, not just their ears. It was as if the forest itself was speaking through the creature, warning them. Panic spread like wildfire. Samira screamed, and the group turned to run, but the path they had come from was no longer there. The trees seemed to twist and bend, closing in, trapping them within the heart of the forest. The darkness swallowed them whole. They ran in every direction, desperate to find any way out, but the forest shifted with every step, leading them in circles. The creature, or whatever it was, followed them, its glowing eyes always watching from the distance, never getting closer, but always there. As the hours passed, the friends grew exhausted, their minds fraying under the pressure. They stumbled across a small, dilapidated cabin hidden deep within the trees. It looked abandoned, but they had no choice. They rushed inside, slamming the door behind them. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. The walls were covered in strange symbols, some of which seemed to move when they weren't looking directly at them. The floor was littered with remnants of broken furniture, old clothes, and odd trinkets that seemed out of place: bones, feathers, small human-like dolls. Lena, feeling the oppressive weight of the space, grabbed a lantern and wandered deeper into the cabin, hoping to find something that could help them escape. That was when she found it, a journal, its pages yellowed with age. The writing was in a language none of them recognized, but there were illustrations, strange, grotesque creatures with hollow eyes and twisted forms. And then, she found it, the drawing of the figure they had seen, with the same hollow eyes. It was then that Samira screamed from the other room. The others rushed to her side, only to find her standing frozen, staring at a mirror on the wall. The reflection was not her own. In the mirror, a pale, twisted figure stood behind her, its hand reaching out, its hollow eyes fixed on her. Before anyone could react, the creature's growl echoed through the cabin, louder than before. The whispers returned, now growing into a chorus of voices, chanting in a language they couldn't understand. The walls seemed to pulse, as if the forest itself was closing in on them. In that moment, they realized that they were not in control anymore. The forest had claimed them, and there would be no escape. The creature's voice reverberated in their minds once again. "You are mine now. This forest is your grave." The lantern flickered out, and the forest consumed them. The next morning, the villagers found nothing but their abandoned camp. No sign of the 5 friends. Only the whispers in the wind, and the faint glow of hollow eyes watching from the forest's depths. The Midnight Visitor, extended version. Samuel stood frozen in the dark room, Ilara's words echoing in his mind. The shadows around him seemed to move, each one a specter waiting to pounce. The darkness of the house was overwhelming, and it felt like time itself had stopped in this place. Ilara, the figure before him, moved slowly, her tattered form looming with a hollow intensity. Her face was mutilated, almost unrecognizable, as though she had been twisted by time and suffering. Her eyes, full of pain and anger, seemed to stare through him. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice a soft, haunting sound that chilled his bones. "No one who enters this house ever leaves, unless they become like us." Samuel's heart raced. He tried to look for an escape, but every time he turned, the shadows grew closer, making it impossible to see the way out. Every corner he looked at seemed to stretch deeper into darkness. "Ilara, what happened to you?" Samuel stammered, his voice shaking with fear. "Why are you trapped here? How can I help you?" Ilara's lips curled into a twisted smile. "Help me?" she repeated. "No. You can't help me. I was like you once, a stranger, an outsider, drawn into this place. But once you cross the threshold, there's no turning back. You are part of this now." Samuel's breath quickened. He felt the weight of the house pressing in on him, suffocating him. The very air was thick with the memories of those who had disappeared before him. But there was something else, something about Ilara's words. They were a warning, but also an invitation. The air shifted, and the room seemed to grow colder. "There's a choice," Ilara said, her voice a low whisper that sent a shiver through his spine. "You can leave with your soul intact, but you must leave your past behind. Forget everything. The memories, the pain, the regrets. Leave them all behind and you'll be free." Samuel felt a tug in his chest, an urge to run, but he couldn't move. His feet were frozen to the ground, as if the very house was holding him in place. In his mind, fragments of his past failures, losses, moments of despair flashed before his eyes. Was it really possible to leave them all behind? "You are not the first," Ilara continued, her voice becoming softer, more soothing. "Every stranger who has come here faced the same choice. And every one of them failed. They could not escape their pasts." Samuel's mind raced. The house, the shadows, the specters that surrounded him, they were all part of something ancient, something that had claimed the souls of the lost. But Ilara, she seemed different. There was something tragic about her, something that made him hesitate. Could he help her, or was she too far gone? Suddenly, the shadows seemed to come alive, writhing and swirling around the room. Figures began to emerge from the darkness, other souls, trapped in the same fate as Ilara. Some were familiar faces from the village's forgotten history, others were strangers who had arrived here long ago. One of the figures stepped forward. It was Father Anton, the village's long-dead priest. Samuel recognized him instantly. "Samuel," he said, his voice oddly comforting, yet chilling. "You are not alone here. You will never be alone. We are all bound by the same curse." The priest's eyes were hollow, like the others, but there was something in his gaze that seemed to beckon Samuel to join them. "We were once like you. We came to this house looking for answers, just as you did. But there are no answers here. Only silence. Only darkness." Samuel looked around at the other souls, their forms flickering in and out of the shadows. Some of them were weeping, others were silent, their eyes empty. They had all become a part of this forsaken place, their lives swallowed by the curse. "What is this place?" Samuel whispered, his voice trembling. "Why are we here?" Father Anton stepped closer, his voice low and somber. "This house is a prison for the lost. The ones who come seeking answers, seeking redemption. But the price of entering is your soul. You can never leave. And neither will we." Ilara's voice broke through the haze of despair. "Unless..." Samuel's heart skipped a beat. "Unless what?" he asked, desperate for a chance, any chance to escape. Ilara's eyes flashed with a cold fire. "Unless you break the curse," she said. "Unless you destroy this house, and with it, the spirits that haunt it." "But how?" Samuel cried. "How can I break the curse?" The room grew even colder, and the shadows seemed to press in closer. "The key is within you," Ilara replied. "The power to destroy this place lies in your past. It is the very thing that brought you here. The sins you've carried, the regrets you've held onto, they are the source of this curse." Samuel was stunned. "My past?" he asked, barely able to grasp the idea. "You want me to confront it? To face all the pain and failure?" Ilara nodded. "You must let go of it, or it will consume you. Only then can you free yourself and us. But be warned, breaking the curse may not set everyone free." Samuel's mind was spinning. The weight of his past was something he had always carried, but now, it felt like his only chance for survival. "I can't," he whispered. "I'm not strong enough." Ilara's expression softened for a moment, and she stepped closer. "You are stronger than you think, Samuel. This house, these spirits, they are all fragments of our regrets, our broken selves. If you can face your demons, you can free us all." With those words, the house seemed to pulse with energy, as if it was alive, waiting for him to make his choice. Samuel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the past pressing against him. Every failure, every mistake, every regret, he had carried them for so long. But now, he had to let them go. Taking a deep breath, Samuel opened his eyes. He knew what he had to do. The ground beneath Samuel's feet began to tremble as he stepped forward, his heart pounding. The spirits gathered around him, their hollow eyes fixed on him as they waited, uncertain of what would happen next. Ilara stood silently, watching him with a mixture of hope and despair. "Samuel," she whispered. "Are you ready?" He nodded, his voice steady. "Yes. I am ready." In that moment, everything changed. The owl shuddered, the shadows twisted, and a blinding light enveloped him. The spirits screamed as they vanished into the ether, their tortured forms fading away. And for the first time, Samuel felt free from the weight of his past, free from the curse that had bound him. But as the light faded, Samuel realized something. The house was gone. The village was gone. He was alone in the darkness. And he knew that while the curse had been broken, some spirits would never leave. Some spirits, like Ilara's, would continue to haunt the forgotten places, waiting for someone else to come along and face their fate. The village was gone, and so was the house. Samuel had broken the curse, but at a cost. The midnight visitor had come to find freedom, but it was the ones who stayed behind who would always be remembered. The forgotten patient. It was a cold evening in a small European village tucked away at the edge of a forest. The air was thick with mist, and the streets were nearly deserted, save for a few lanterns flickering in the wind. At the far end of the village stood an ancient hospital, abandoned for years, its windows dark and broken. Rumors had circulated that something unspeakable had happened there many decades ago, but no one dared to speak of it. The village, once a thriving hub, had slowly dwindled in population. Many had left, and those who remained spoke only in whispers about the horrors that still haunted the forsaken building. It was said that a patient had died in the hospital under mysterious circumstances, and ever since then, the hospital had been cursed, its halls echoing with the sounds of wailing spirits. One evening, a foreign doctor named Emil arrived in the village. He had heard rumors about the abandoned hospital and was intrigued by its eerie reputation. Emil had traveled from a far-off city to take up a position at a medical institution in the next town over. But his fascination with the supernatural and the macabre drew him to the forgotten hospital, and he decided to investigate the mysteries that lay within its decaying walls. He arrived as the sun was setting, the skies turning a deep shade of crimson. The wind howled through the trees, and the hospital seemed to stand like a silent sentinel, watching his every move. Emil, carrying only a lantern and his curiosity, stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and decay. The faint smell of antiseptic lingered, a ghost of the hospital's former purpose. Emil moved through the darkened hallways, his footsteps echoing off the cold stone floors. He had heard about the strange patient, but he was determined to uncover the truth for himself. As he wandered through the corridors, he came across a door at the end of a long hallway. It was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered from within. His heart raced with anticipation as he pushed the door open. Inside, he found a small, dimly lit room. On the bed lay a figure, covered in a tattered sheet. Emil approached cautiously, unsure of what he would find. As he drew closer, the figure beneath the sheet stirred. With a sudden movement, the sheet was thrown aside, revealing a pale, gaunt face. The eyes were wide open, staring into nothingness. It was as if the person was frozen in a state of eternal terror. The figure was completely motionless, save for a slight twitch of its hand. The skin was stretched thin, the bones protruding in on ankles. Emil's breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary patient. This was something far worse. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him, and the lantern flickered out. Emil was plunged into darkness. He could feel the air grow cold, a presence growing stronger in the room. The walls seemed to close in, and a voice, low and guttural, whispered from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come." Emil spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure on the bed slowly sat up, its neck twisting at an unnatural angle. The face was no longer human, its features warped and distorted. The skin was decaying, and the eyes, those hollow, empty eyes, stared directly into Emil's soul. With a sudden scream, the figure lunged at him, its bony fingers reaching for his throat. Emil stumbled back, but the room seemed to stretch and twist, the walls bending in on themselves. He tried to run, but his legs were like lead. The creature's grip tightened around his neck, its breath cold and rancid. In that moment, Emil realized that the patient was not just a victim of some tragic fate. It was the very soul of the hospital itself, cursed to roam the halls, tormenting anyone who dared to enter. And now, it had claimed him. The last thing Emil saw before the darkness consumed him was the patient's face, grinning wickedly, as if pleased to finally have another soul to torment for eternity. The next morning, the villagers found the hospital door ajar. But inside, there was no sign of Emil. The room where the patient had once lain was empty, the bed neatly made, and the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. Some say that Emil's soul is still trapped within the hospital's walls, forever forgotten, a part of the curse that plagues the abandoned building. Others believe that the patient's spirit is now stronger, feeding on the fears of those who come too close to uncover its secrets. But no one dares to speak of it anymore. The hospital stands silent, its horrors hidden in the shadows, waiting for the next curious soul to enter and become another forgotten patient in its long, cursed history.